Chapter 8, The Asylum. Chapter 8, The Asylum. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Antiseptic and cold steel. The ghost of stale vomit and boiled potatoes. It clung to the air like a wet sheet, heavy in his lungs, coating his tongue. Ethan opened his eyes, and the ceiling was a grid of pale yellow tiles, one of them cracked like a river on a dry map. He sat up slowly. The bed creaked beneath him, springs protesting against the thin mattress. No stiffness in his muscles. No ache in his bones. Just a hollow quiet in his skull where his thoughts should have been. He knew his name. Ethan Cole. He knew he was a nurse. He knew he worked at Stone Asylum. Beyond that, there was nothing. The past was a grey static, a channel that played only snow. He should have been panicked, but the panic felt like a memory of a feeling, not the thing itself. This is normal, a voice whispered inside him. But the voice didn't feel like his own. It was the voice of the starch-pressed uniform laid out on the chair by the window. The room was stark. A single bed, a metal nightstand, a crucifix on the wall above the door. The window showed a grey sky pressing down on grey grounds. A fence in the distance. Trees stripped of leaves. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cold through his thin socks. He dressed methodically, his hands knowing the motions even if his mind didn't. White shirt, dark pants, the stiff cap that sat on his head like a crown of obligation. A knock at the door. Sharp. 2 beats. Come in. The door swung open. A woman stood there, her uniform immaculate, her grey hair pulled back so tight it made her eyes look slanted. She had the face of someone who had seen too much and cared too little. Nurse Cole. You're up. Doctor wants a word before your shift begins. Of course, matron. She studied him for a moment, her gaze lingering on his face as if searching for something. Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Ethan followed. The asylum stretched around him like a labyrinth carved from bone and bad dreams. The corridors were long and narrow, painted a shade of green that had long since faded to something sickly. The lights were fluorescent tubes that buzzed and flickered, casting a pallor over everything they touched. Doors lined the walls, each with a small window, each with a number stenciled in black paint. Patients moved in the margins. A man sat in a chair, staring at nothing, his lips moving in an endless conversation with a ghost. A woman pressed her face against the glass of her door, her hands flat against it, her eyes tracking Ethan as he passed. He felt their gaze like a weight on his skin. The doctor's office was at the end of the east corridor, just before the heavy door that led to the restricted wing. A brass plaque read, Dr. Aldrich Vane, Superintendent Star. The name sparked nothing. No memory, no recognition. But his hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob. Inside, the office was warm. A fire crackled in the hearth. Books lined the walls, their spines cracked and faded. A large oak desk dominated the room, and behind it sat a man who looked like he had stepped out of a photograph from another era. Dr. Vane was tall, with silver hair combed back from a high forehead. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they held Ethan's gaze with an unsettling stillness. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Nurse Cole. Please, sit. Ethan Saturday. You're settling in well, I hope? Yes, doctor. You have questions. It wasn't a question. Ethan met his gaze. I don't remember how I got here. Of course you don't. That's perfectly normal. Vane leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. White Stone is a special facility. Our patients come to us broken, fractured by traumas too deep to reach. We heal them. But the healing is intensive. It requires a certain sacrifice from our staff. What kind of sacrifice? The kind you've already made. Vane's smile widened, just slightly. You came here because you wanted to help. You volunteered for the memory suppression protocol. It allows you to serve without the burden of your own history weighing you down. A clean slate. A fresh start. Ethan's jaw tightened. I volunteered for this. You signed the papers yourself. Would you like to see them? Yes. Vane opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the desk. Inside was a form, filled out in neat handwriting, bearing a signature that looked like his own. Asterisk Ethan Cole. Nurse. Duration, indefinite. Asterisk. The date was 6 months ago. He didn't remember. The rules are simple, Vane said, reclaiming the folder. Medication rounds are at 8 in the morning and 8 in the evening. No loud noises on corridor C. The night warden makes rounds after midnight. If you hear him, stand perfectly still until he passes. And the East Wing is restricted to authorized personnel only. At no time are you to enter the East Wing after dark. Why? Because the patients there are in the final stages of their treatment. Disturbing them could undo months of work. Vane's eyes hardened. Do you understand, Nurse Cole? Yes, Doctor. Good. Matron Higgins will show you to your post. The interview was over. Ethan stood, his legs heavy, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. Doctor. Yes. What if I wanted to remember? The silence stretched for a long moment. When Vane spoke, his voice was cold. Then you wouldn't be very good at your job. The day was a blur of routine. Medication carts and meal trays. Bedpans and bandages. The endless hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of someone crying. Ethan moved through it all with a mechanical precision that felt foreign and familiar at the same time. His hands knew what to do. His feet knew the path. But his mind was a fog, and every so often, something would cut through it. A patient would look at him with too much recognition. A door would creak open at the wrong moment. The name Dr. Vane would echo in the back of his skull like a bell that had already been rung. He tried to ignore it. The afternoon shift brought him to Corridor C, a long hallway lined with rooms that housed the most difficult cases. The patients here were the ones who didn't speak, who sat in corners and rocked, who stared at walls and saw things no one else could see. He was checking the door locks when a hand shot out from between the bars of a window and grabbed his wrist. He spun. A face pressed against the glass. A woman, her hair shorn close to her scalp, her eyes wide and white-rimmed. She was young, maybe 30, but her face was lined with a weariness that made her look ancient. Don't trust him, she whispered. Let go of me. He wears a mask of kindness, but underneath, he's all teeth. I've seen what he does. I've seen the East Wing. You're not supposed to talk about the East Wing. I'm not supposed to talk at all. She laughed, a broken sound. But I remember. Do you remember, Nurse Cole? Do you remember what you were before you came here? The question hit him like a punch to the chest. He pulled his arm free, stepping back. I don't know what you're talking about. You will. He always shows his hand eventually. It's the one thing he can't control. She retreated into the shadows of her room, and the door clicked shut. Ethan stood there, his heart pounding, his breath shallow. The name Ethan Cole felt thin in his mind, like a coat that didn't quite fit. He walked away. But the woman's words followed him down the corridor, rattling in his skull like stones in a can. The evening bell rang at 7. Ethan was in the staff break room, a small, windowless space with a coffee maker that brewed something that only vaguely resembled coffee. He sat at the table, staring at his hands, trying to find something in the emptiness behind his eyes. Matron Higgins entered, her shoes clicking against the linoleum. Night shift starts in 30 minutes. You'll be on Corridor B. The patients there are stable, but the rules still apply. No loud noises. No unnecessary contact. And if the warden comes, you freeze. I understand. She studied him for a moment. You have that look about you. What look? The look of someone who's going to break the rules. She sighed, shaking her head. They all think they're the exception. They're not. The East Wing is off limits for a reason, Cole. The people who go in don't always come out. Is that a threat? It's a fact. She turned and left. The coffee machine hissed. Ethan sat alone in the silence, the weight of a life he couldn't remember pressing down on him. The night shift was a tomb. The corridors were dark, lit only by the dim glow of emergency lights. The patients were asleep, their rooms silent. The only sound was the soft shuffle of Ethan's shoes against the floor. He made his rounds, checking doors, listening for anything out of place. The hours crawled by, each one longer than the last. At midnight, he heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Echoing from somewhere deep in the asylum. The warden. Ethan froze, his back pressed against the wall. The footsteps grew closer, louder, until they were right outside the door to Corridor C. A shadow passed by the window. Then the footsteps continued, fading into the distance. Ethan let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. But then he saw it. The door to the east wing. It was open. A sliver of darkness, barely visible in the dim light. A crack in the wall of the world. He knew he should walk away. He knew the rules. He knew what Matron Higgins had said. But the door was *open star. And something was calling him. He moved before he could stop himself, his feet carrying him down the corridor, past the heavy door, into the darkness beyond. The east wing was different. The air was colder here, thick with dust and the smell of old blood. The walls were cracked, the paint peeling in long strips. The lights flickered weakly, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with a will of their own. Ethan walked slowly, his hand brushing against the wall for balance. The corridor stretched on, endless, curving in ways that didn't make sense. He passed doors with numbers that had been scratched out, replaced with symbols he didn't recognize. At the end of the hall, there was a room. The door was ajar. He pushed it open. It was an operating theater. Rows of empty seats faced a central table, where a single figure lay strapped down. The figure was covered in a white sheet, but Ethan could see the outline of a body beneath. A chart hung on the wall. Patient 8. Subject: Clara Marsh. Treatment: Project Dawn. Status: incomplete. He reached for the chart, his fingers brushing against the yellowed paper. A hand grabbed his wrist. He spun. The figure on the table was sitting up, the sheet falling away to reveal a woman's face. Her eyes were black, hollow, filled with a cold that seeped into his bones. "Hello, Ethan." His name on her lips was a knife. "Who are you?" "You know who I am. You just don't remember." She swung her legs over the edge of the table, standing. She was barefoot, wearing a thin hospital gown that did nothing to hide the scars that crisscrossed her arms. "You were here when they did this to me. You held my hand and told me it would be okay. I don't. You lied." The lights flickered. The shadows deepened. Ethan backed away, but the door behind him had closed. He was trapped. "I died on this table," Clara said, her voice flat. "And you helped him do it." "No." "Yes. You were his apprentice. His right hand. You believed in his work. You believed in Project Dawn. You thought you were saving the world. What happened?" She laughed. It was a hollow sound. "You found out the truth. And when you tried to stop him, he wiped you clean. He made you forget everything. He gave you a new life, a new name, and put you in a cage of your own making." The words hit him like a physical force. Images flashed behind his eyes. A lab. Bright lights. A man in a white coat holding a scalpel. A woman screaming. Blood on his hands. His own voice, begging. "Please. Please stop." He fell to his knees, his hands clutching his head. The memory was there, just out of reach, a scream trapped behind a wall of glass. "I can give it back," Clara said, kneeling in front of him. "I can show you everything. But you have to open the door." "What door?" "The door in your mind. The one he locked. You have to let me in." He looked up at her. Her eyes were no longer black. They were the eyes of a woman who had been broken and left to die. "If I open the door," he said slowly, "what happens? You remember. And you become the person he tried to bury. Is that what you want? I want you to know the truth. So you can finish what you started." She reached out, her cold fingers touching his temple. And the world exploded into light. He was standing in a laboratory. It was clean, sterile, nothing like the decaying asylum he had just left. Machines hummed, consoles blinked. And in the center of the room, Dr. Vane stood over a table, his hands gloved, his eyes bright. You see, Ethan, the problem with humanity is that it remembers. It carries its trauma, its pain, its history, like a weight around its neck. The grey doesn't just corrupt the body. It corrupts the soul. The only way to save it is to give it a fresh start. But at what cost, Doctor? Ethan heard himself say. The voice was his own, but younger, more hopeful. We can't just. We can. We must. The world tree needs a pilot. A blank slate. Someone who can interface with its consciousness without the noise of a corrupted past. We are building an ark, Ethan. An ark for the human soul. And the test subjects. Vane's smile was cold. Sacrifices. To a greater cause. Ethan looked down at the table. Clara was strapped to it, her eyes wide with terror. This isn't right. It's necessary. It's asterisk murder star. It's asterisk progress star. Vane picked up a syringe, filled with a liquid that glowed faintly. If you can't handle it, then you're not fit for the work. Ethan watched as Vane lowered the needle to Clara's arm. And then he moved. He grabbed Vane's wrist, twisting it, sending the syringe clattering to the floor. I said no. Vane looked at him, his expression unreadable. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's asterisk my asterisk mistake. He reached for Clara, to free her restraints. The world went white. A cold hand wrapped around his throat. You were the one who was supposed to save me, Clara's voice whispered in his ear. But he caught you first. He erased you. And he made you into another of his tools. Ethan gasped, struggling to breathe. The memory faded, replaced by the dim lights of the East Wing. He was on the floor, Clara kneeling over him, her fingers pressed against his temples. I'm sorry, he choked out. I know you are. But sorry doesn't bring me back. What do you want from me? I want you to remember who you were. Not the nurse. Not the pawn. The man who tried to stand against the architect. The man who failed. She released him, stepping back. Her form flickered, translucent. I am the 9th fragment, she said. I am the door to everything you've lost. Take me, and you will never be his puppet again. How? You have to choose. You can stay here, in this cage, playing the nurse for eternity. Or you can open the door and face the truth. Ethan looked at his hands. They were shaking. He thought about the emptiness where his past should have been. The hollow feeling that had followed him since he woke up in that room. The name asterisk Ethan Cole asterisk that felt like a borrowed coat. He thought about Dr. Vane's cold eyes. The woman in Corridor C who had warned him. The machinery in the dark. And he made his choice. Open the door. Clara smiled. And the world fell away. He was walking through a corridor of light. The walls were made of memory, fragments of a life he had lived but couldn't recall. A child's laughter. A woman's face. A library full of books. A diploma on a wall. A man shaking his hand, saying, "Welcome to the team." Dr. Vane's team. He saw himself in the lab, younger, sharper, wearing a white coat and carrying a clipboard. He saw the experiments. The patients. The quiet desperation that had driven him to question everything. And he saw the moment of his betrayal. Vane standing over him, a syringe in hand. I'm sorry, Ethan. You were my best student. But you have a conscience, and that makes you dangerous. The needle going into his neck. The world going white. And then. Nothing. A blank. A void where his identity had been. A clean slate, Vane had said. A perfect vessel. But he had left a crack. The wall shattered. And Ethan came back to himself. He was lying on the floor of the operating theatre. Clara was gone. Only a single object remained, a fragment of bone, smooth and white, carved with symbols that pulsed with a faint light. The 9th fragment. He reached out, his fingers closing around it. The memories settled into place like puzzle pieces, filling the gaps in his mind. He knew who he was. He knew what he had done. He knew what had been taken from him. And he knew what he had to do. He stood, the fragment clutched in his hand. The asylum was crumbling around him, the walls dissolving into grey mist. The trial was over. But the war had just begun. He opened his eyes in the hall of Blackhaven. The stone floor was cold beneath him. The air smelled of dust and old wood and something faintly metallic, blood, perhaps, or the residue of 1,000 deaths. Maya was there, her face pale, her eyes filled with concern. "Ethan. You're back. How long was I gone?" "3 days. We thought," she stopped, her gaze dropping to the fragment in his hand. "What happened in there?" He sat up slowly, his body aching. "I met myself. The person I was before the architect wiped my mind. And I was someone who tried to stop him." He looked at the fragment, watching the light pulse within it. "I was his assistant. I believed in his work. But when I saw the cost, I tried to walk away. He didn't let me." Maya knelt beside him. "What are you going to do now?" "Finish what I started. But this time, I'm doing it on my terms." He stood, his legs unsteady. The fragment seemed to hum in his hand, connected to something deeper, something that stretched beyond the walls of Blackhaven. Vera appeared in the doorway, her dark eyes watching him with an ancient sadness. "You've changed," she said. "I remember. I'm not the same person who left." "No. You're something new. Something the architect didn't account for." Ethan looked at the fragment, then at Vera. "You knew, didn't you? You knew what I was. I knew what you had been. What you might become." She stepped closer, her hand brushing against his cheek. "The memories are sharp, aren't they? They cut. They do. But they also heal." She smiled, a fragile thing. "Welcome back, Ethan." He nodded, the weight of his past settling around him like a coat that didn't quite fit. But it was his. He would grow into it. He would make it fit. And he would burn the man who had tried to take it from him.